Well, tell us more about Guestio. How does it work? Who's it for? How can people really get the most and maximize all that Guestio has to offer?
Yeah, so we started it to be for podcasters looking to book guests. We've kind of shifted that model a little bit, and we're focusing a little bit more on helping guests get booked on podcasts. Mainly just because we found that the market for podcasters who are willing to pay to interview guests is a really small market, and so we're just trying to pivot the company to move toward a market that's a little bit more, just a little bit more sizable. So the number of people who want to be a guest on shows is only growing, like significantly growing. In fact, it's to me leaving a shortage in the space for podcasters, because what's crazy to me is like since 2020, I believe the total number of index podcasts has gone from 2 million to 4.3, 4.4 million total number of podcasts that have ever released one episode. But the crazy thing to me is that in that same period of time, I believe the total number of active shows that are actually releasing every at least 30 days, the total number of those shows has only increased by like 5 or 10%.
That's because only 1% of podcasts go over 10 episodes.
Right. It's a very, very small percentage. So to me, it's like it's creating a gap in the market for more like qualified, solid, good podcasts, because more and more people are realizing how beneficial it is to be a guest on shows. And like I said, that market's unlimited, right? There's 30 million, 40 million small business owners, not to mention authors,
speakers, coaches, entertainers, athletes.
Yep, they all want to be booked on podcasts, and the total number of podcasts is not growing in terms of active. So it's kind of shrinking the market a little bit, but that's why we're going toward that. Like, hey, you want to be booked as a guest on shows? We believe that this is the best possible way to do it.
What I love is you shared like how you learned being an interviewer.
Yes.
What about the guests? Not all guests are created equal.
No.
Not all guests are like yourself that carry the conversation.
Right? Like, not everybody's a Jeff Fedster. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes. I mean, so
380 guests.
If you, how does Guestio help you to be a good guest? I mean, just because you got some money and you're paying and you're like, get me placed. I mean, that could be even difficult for you if the podcasters are saying, listen, Travis, no more.
Right, because some favors aren't worth it. I mean, I get a lot of offers, right? And I'm like, dude, some favors aren't worth it.
Right. No, it's a very good question. So we, for a while, we were actually kind of struggling with that, because we built this agency model that was like, we'll go out, white glove service, concierge done for you. We'll get you booked on top shows. And we're running into a little bit of that, where we would make a connection and the host would be like, okay, but it's like, it's so difficult to pull anything out of this guest. Like, what can we do about this? But they're a solid guest. It's like, well, they built a massive company, or they have a lot of
football coaches. They're trained not to answer questions. Like I had Anthony Lynn from the Chargers one time, and it was like, give him this open-ended question, and all his answers were like, "Yep."
Dude, there was this one guy who is a really well-known business author, and I had heard a couple stories about like how difficult he is to interview, and I had him on my show. It's like pulling teeth to try to get
and
information.
you're a professional interviewer,
you
know what I mean? So even there, like it's
that
like,
was when I was like 400 episodes in, and he was still just like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So to answer your question, what we did recently is we pulled back on agency and concierge services, because frankly, I believe that like in the future, the future of this whole like guesting and connecting guests to shows and things is going to be more in the version of software, because I just think it makes more sense. Like, so for instance, there's a lot of agencies out there that exist, and I had a graduate researcher do some research on this for me. They found all of the podcast guesting agencies that they could find, did all of their pricing, all of their placements, and did a calculation, figured out that on average they're charging anywhere from $500 to $700 per appearance that they get booked on somebody else's show. On average, obviously, some of them are going to be $200, some of them are going to be $1,000 or $1,500, but somewhere in there, $500 to $700. Where on Guestio, what we're doing is creating a marketplace where shows can come in and basically say like, hey, if you want to be a guest on my show, it's $100 for the spot. So I think it's better because, first of all, the show finally gets paid some money, because most independent podcasters will never. Exactly. Cool. Most podcasters will never get paid a dime for any of the work that they do on their show, and then they get met with this like disdain from agencies, where the agency goes like, hey, we have a great guest for you, they're awesome for these reasons, and they pitch you the guest, and I get 150 of these things a month probably at least, and most of them are terrible. And whenever I reply with like, sure, we charge X to come on the show, it's met with this like disdain to be like, well, we don't do that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, what do you mean you don't do that? Like, your client's paying you. Right? Like, you're getting paid to place that person on my show. Why shouldn't I get like, because they conflate traditional media with podcasting is the problem. So they look at traditional media and they go like, well, that's payola. And it's like, well, I'm not a staff journalist at Forbes.
Right.
I don't get paid a salary to write articles and be a journalist.
God.
I'm an independent podcaster. Like, I make money based off of the things that I decide to make money on. So if like, you're not pitching me just for the value you can bring to my audience.
Right.
Cut that horse shit like from the top. You're pitching me because you want to sell something to my audience, which, by the way, I don't care. Cool. If you're a good person, you have a strong product or service, you should be selling your product or service to audiences, and you should bring value to the table. But don't get mad because I've been taking the time, the energy, the money for 7 years to build an audience of thousands of people that like listening to my show. So why are you going to be upset when I'm like, hey, I'm going to charge you? It's for the advertising space to come on my show. So we think that putting the podcaster in charge of that and saying like, hey, charge whatever you want up to, we put limits on it and we make them verify stats so that's a good customer experience still. But I would rather see that money go to the podcaster than just the agencies, because I think they deserve it, first of all. And also I think it's going to cut the cost of being booked on shows tremendously. Instead of paying $600 to go on a show that's worth $100, you pay $100 and it goes to the podcaster instead of the agency.